There he stood in that courthouse, this mountain of a man who'd lived alone for 15 years, his weathered hands trembling as he signed the adoption papers. "Daddy," whispered little Jake, tugging at his flannel shirt. Sam Carter, the hermit, the ghost of Pine Ridge, looked down at three faces that had become his whole world. But how did a man who'd sworn off humanity after losing everything become someone's hero? How did a broken widower hiding in the woods transform into the father these children desperately needed? Well, that story begins with three desperate knocks on a cabin door during the worst storm Pine Ridge had ever seen. Now listen here, y'all, there ain't many souls who choose to live 15 years in complete solitude. But Sam Carter wasn't like most folks. Deep in the heart of Pine Ridge Forest, where the ancient oaks whispered secrets and the morning mist clung to the earth like sorrow itself, stood a cabin that housed the most broken man you ever did see. Sam woke that October morning same as he had for 5,475 days before, alone, aching, and wishing the good Lord would just take him home already. The silence in that cabin was so thick it pressed against his chest like a weight, making it hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to remember why he kept going at all. 45 years old and looking every bit of 70, his beard had gone, grey as winter ash. His hands shook from too much whiskey and too little hope, and his eyes, Lord have mercy, his eyes held the kind of emptiness that comes from screaming into the void for 15 years and hearing nothing but your own echo. That man had built himself a tomb out of heartbreak and crawled inside to die slow. 15 years ago, Sam Carter had been somebody entirely different, a loving husband to sweet Mary, a proud daddy to baby William, a man who laughed out loud and believed tomorrow would be better than today. But life, well, life has a way of teaching lessons that don't just cut deep, they carve out your insides and leave you hollow as a rotted tree. The accident still played in his mind every single morning, like a curse he couldn't break. That icy December road, Mary holding 9-month-old William in her arms as they headed to town for Christmas shopping. Sam was supposed to go with them, supposed to protect them, but he'd stayed behind to fix a loose shingle that could have waited. Another day. "Won't be but an hour, darling," Mary had called out, her breath making little clouds in the cold air, baby William gurgling happily in her arms. "Keep that coffee warm for me, and maybe we'll have some alone time after little Willie goes to sleep." That was the last time he ever heard her voice. The last time he saw his son smile. The sheriff found them 3 hours later in Miller's Creek. The truck overturned, the ice too thin, the water too cold. By the time Sam got there, they'd already pulled the bodies out. Mary's face was peaceful, like she was sleeping. Baby William. Lord forgive him. But Sam still woke up screaming from dreams about finding his boy's tiny blue fingers. Sam dragged himself from the narrow cot that served as his bed, his body protesting every movement. The pain in his back never left anymore. Consequence of sleeping on a mattress thin as paper and working himself near to death every day just to feel something other than the emptiness. He shuffled to the kitchen, his bare feet finding the same worn path they'd followed for all these years, the floorboards creaking like old bones. The coffee pot sat exactly where Mary had left it that last morning, never moved, never touched, gathering dust like everything else in this godforsaken place. He made his coffee in a tin cup instead, bitter and black as his soul. Some mornings he thought about drinking it all down at once, scalding his throat, ending the misery quick and simple. But then he'd remember Pastor William saying suicide was a sin, and Sam figured he'd already disappointed the Almighty enough for one lifetime. The cabin around him was a museum of broken dreams. Dust covered everything like grave dirt. The rocking chair Mary used to sit in while nursing baby. William sat empty, still angled toward the window where she liked to watch the sunrise and sing hymns in her sweet voice. On the mantel above the cold fireplace sat a small wooden toy truck, carved with Sam's own hands for his son's first birthday. A birthday they never got to celebrate, wrapped in tissue paper that had yellowed with age and Sam's tears. Some days, the silence got so heavy, Sam found himself talking to that empty rocking chair, begging Mary's ghost to come back, to tell him how to stop hurting, to explain why God let good people freeze to death while leaving miserable wretches like him to wander the earth alone. But the chair never answered, and the silence just pressed down harder, suffocating him slow. Outside, the October wind cut through his thin walls like a knife, carrying the promise of another brutal winter. Sam pulled on his worn flannel shirt, the same one Mary had mended the sleeve on the week before she died, and headed for the woodshed. His daily routine was as rigid as prison bars and twice as punishing. Cut wood until his hands bled, stack wood until his back screamed, eat something tasteless from a can, drink himself numb and try to sleep through the nightmares that visited him every single night without fail. The people of Cedar Valley had their own stories about Sam Carter, and none of them were kind. The ghost of Pine Ridge, they called him, crossing themselves when his name came up. Some said he'd lost his mind up there in the woods, that you could hear him sobbing and yelling at the trees on quiet nights. Others whispered he'd made some kind of pact with darkness itself, that his grief had turned him into something that wasn't quite human anymore. The preacher's wife claimed she'd seen him wandering the cemetery at midnight, talking to headstones like they could talk back. Truth was Sam preferred being the monster in their stories. Better to be feared than pitied. Better to be the cautionary tale than the object of their charity. He'd learned the hard way that loving somebody meant losing somebody, and he wasn't fixing to go through that particular hell ever again. Better to be alone, better to be forgotten, better to let his heart turn to stone than risk it getting shattered again. But Lord have mercy, the loneliness was eating him alive from the inside out, gnawing at his bones like cancer, making him wonder if maybe the darkness whispered back after all. Before we continue this emotional story, put in the comments below which city you're watching from. It'll be a pleasure to give your comment a little heart. Now let's continue this exciting story. That storm hit Pine Ridge like the wrath of heaven itself, and Sam Carter had barely made it inside his cabin when the sky opened up and poured down 15 years worth of judgment. The wind howled through, the trees like tortured souls, rattling his windows and making the whole place shake, like it was fixing to come apart at the seams. Thunder crashed so loud it seemed to split the very mountains, and lightning turned the world white bright every few seconds, showing Sam glimpses of a creation gone wild. He sat hunched at his kitchen table, nursing his third cup of black coffee, and trying not to think about how Mary used to get scared during storms like this. She'd curl up next to him on their old sofa, holding baby William close, and Sam would wrap his arms around them both, whispering that everything was going to be all right. Lord have mercy. But he'd been such a fool to think he could promise safety to anyone in this cruel world. The storm raged for hours, each crack of thunder making Sam's hands shake worse than they already did. He'd stopped keeping track of time years ago. What was the point when every day felt like drowning slow? But this tempest seemed to go on forever, like the good Lord was trying to wash something clean, or maybe tear something down that needed tearing. Then around what must have been near midnight, Sam heard something that made his blood turn to ice water in his veins. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate, desperate. Knock, knock, knock. Sam's coffee cup slipped from his trembling fingers and shattered on the floor, the sound sharp as a gunshot in the storm's brief pause. For a heartbeat, he thought maybe he'd finally lost what was left of his mind completely. 15 years of isolation could drive a man to hearing things that weren't there, but then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. No, Sam whispered to the empty room, his voice hoarse from years of disuse. Ain't nobody out there. Ain't nobody alive crazy enough to be wandering these woods in weather like this. But his hands were already moving toward the shotgun mounted. Above the fireplace, muscle memory from a time when he'd had something worth protecting. The knocking came a third time, weaker now, more desperate, and Sam felt something twist in his chest that he'd thought was dead and buried. With legs that felt like water, he approached the heavy wooden door he hadn't opened for a living soul in more years than he cared to count. His hand hovered over the bolt, and for a wild moment he considered just staying put, letting whoever was out there find their own way to shelter or judgment. After all, Sam Carter was supposed to be dead to the world, a ghost story told to frighten children. But then he heard it, a sound that cut through his defenses like a hot knife through butter, a child's cry, thin and frightened, barely audible over the storm's fury. "Please," came a woman's voice, so broken and desperate it made Sam's chest ache in ways he'd forgotten were possible. "Please, if anyone's in there, my children." Sam's hand moved to the bolt without his permission, and before he could stop himself, he was pulling the door open against the driving rain. What he saw there on his threshold made him stumble backward, like he'd been struck by lightning. A woman stood in his doorway, soaked to the bone and swaying on her feet like she might collapse any second. She was probably in her 30s, though hardship had aged her something fierce. Her dark hair hung in wet strings around a face that was all sharp angles and hollow cheeks, the face of someone who'd been hungry more often than not. But it was Her eyes that near about stopped Sam's heart. They held the same kind of desperate emptiness he saw in his own mirror every morning. Behind her huddled 3 small figures, children no bigger than field mice, shivering so hard their teeth chattered like castanets. The oldest looked to be maybe 10 years old, a boy with dark hair and his mama's stubborn chin. Next to him stood a little girl 8 or so with frightened eyes wide as saucers. And clinging to the woman's soaked skirt was the smallest one, a boy who couldn't have been more than 5, his tiny face blue with cold. "Ma'am," Sam managed to croak out, his voice rusty as an old gate hinge. The word felt foreign on his tongue. After years of silence, "Please," the woman whispered again, and Sam could see she was using the last of her strength just to stay upright. "My wagon broke down miles back. We've been walking. Children are so cold." The little boy, Lord above, he was so small, so fragile, let out another pitiful cry, and something inside Sam's chest cracked open like ice in spring. The child looked up at him with eyes the exact same shade of brown as baby William's had. "Pin?" And Sam felt 15 years of careful numbness shatter all at once. "Get inside," he heard himself saying, stepping back from the door. "All of you, get in here before you freeze to death." The woman stumbled forward, practically carrying the smallest boy, while the older 2 children pressed close to her sides like scared rabbits. They stood dripping in Sam's entryway, looking around at the dusty, forgotten cabin with the kind of wariness that comes from having doors slammed in your face too many times. Sam slammed the door against the storm and turned to face his unexpected guests, his heart hammering like a woodpecker in his chest. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the children's chattering teeth and the storm's fury outside. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been this close to other human beings, couldn't remember how to form words that weren't curses or complaints. He started, then stopped, his throat closing up tight. The woman was looking at him with such gratitude, it made him want to run and hide. I ain't had company and thank you," she whispered, and tears mixed with rainwater on her cheeks. "Thank you so much. I'm Grace Miller, and these are my children, Tommy, Lucy, and little Jake." Sam stared at her, at them, feeling like a man who'd been living underwater suddenly dragged up into the light. Grace Miller, Tommy, Lucy, Jake, names that meant people. Real living people standing in his dead house, breathing life into air that had been stale with grief for 15 long years. And God help him, but Sam Carter didn't know if that was salvation or the beginning of a whole new kind of torment. Now, listen here. Sam Carter hadn't been around children in 15 years, and Lord have mercy, it showed something awful. As Grace Miller and her 3 young'uns stood dripping in his entryway, Sam felt like a man who'd forgotten how to breathe. The silence stretched between them thick as molasses, broken only by little Jake's pitiful whimpering and the storm pounding against his windows like it was trying to get back in. "Hi, sir." Sam stumbled over words that felt foreign on his tongue. "Y'all need to get them wet clothes off before you catch your death." His voice came out rougher than he intended, making little Lucy shrink closer to her mama's side. Sight of that child's fear cut through Sam like a rusty blade. He'd become the kind of man that scared little ones, and that knowledge sat heavy as a stone in his chest. Grace nodded gratefully, though her hands shook so bad she could barely work the buttons on Jake's soaked jacket. The little boy was blue around the lips, his whole body trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. Sam watched them struggle and felt something twist inside him, a rusty memory of what it meant to help, to care, to be something other than a walking corpse. There's some old quilts in the bedroom," he managed, pointing toward the back of the cabin with a hand that trembled near as bad as theirs. "And I reckon I got some clothes that might work for the boy there." Tommy, the oldest, looked up at Sam with eyes that held too much suspicion for a 10-year-old. "You ain't gonna hurt us, are you, mister?" The boy's voice was steady, but Sam could see the way he positioned himself between his mama and Sam, ready to fight if need be. Lord above, that child had learned to be a man too young, just like Sam had done all those years ago when his own daddy ran off and left them. "No, son," Sam whispered, the word son slipping out before he could stop it. It felt like swallowing glass. "I ain't gonna hurt nobody. I ain't used to folks being here is all." Sam shuffled to the bedroom that had stood empty for 15 years, every step feeling like walking through quicksand. The room still smelled like dust and heartbreak, Mary's things exactly where she'd left them that last morning. Her brush still sat on the dresser, long golden hairs caught in the bristles. Her nightgown hung on a peg by the window, waiting for a woman who'd never come home. His hands shook as he pulled out an old trunk from under the bed, the trunk that held baby William's clothes, tiny shirts and pants that Sam had never been able to throw away or look at without falling apart completely. But these children needed dry clothes, and maybe his boy's things could finally serve some purpose other than torturing him with memories. When Sam came back with an armload of quilts and small clothes, he found Grace trying to warm little Jake by the cold fireplace, rubbing his tiny hands between hers while the child cried softly. The sound pierced Sam's heart like an arrow. It was the same helpless cry his own William used to make when he was hungry or cold or just needed his daddy's comfort. "Fire's been cold for a long while," Sam admitted, his throat tight as a noose. I stopped lighting it when—" He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't explain how the fireplace reminded him too much of the life he'd lost, the warmth he'd never deserved again. "Please," Grace whispered, looking up at him with eyes full of desperate hope. "Please, he's so cold, they all are. I know we ain't got no right to ask for more, but—" Sam's hands moved without his permission, gathering kindling and logs from the pile by the hearth. His fingers remembered the motions even though his heart fought against every movement. Lighting this fire felt like betraying Mary's memory, like admitting he wanted to live again, when he'd promised himself he'd just exist until the good Lord called him home. But as the flames caught and began to chase the chill from the room, Sam watched little Jake's face lose that awful blue tinge, watched Lucy stop shivering long enough to look around with curious eyes, watched Tommy start to relax his protective stance just a fraction, and for the first time in 15 years, Sam felt something other than crushing emptiness in his chest. "Tommy," Grace said softly, "go help your brother get into them dry clothes, Mr. I'm sorry, I don't know your name." "Sam," he said roughly. "Sam Carter. And it ain't Mr. Nothing, just Sam." As Grace helped Jake out of his wet things, Sam caught sight of the little boy's ribs showing through pale skin, the hollow look of a child who'd been hungry more often than fed. The sight made rage rise in Sam's throat. What kind of world let babies go hungry? What kind of man had left this woman to care for 3 children all alone? "Mom," Sam said carefully, not wanting to spook them but needing to know. Where's their daddy?" Grace's face went hard as Winterstone, and she pulled Jake closer to her chest. "Dead," she said simply, but Sam could hear a world of hurt in that single word. "Consumption took him 6 months back, left us with nothing but debts and folks who thought we were their problem to solve or get rid of." Tommy spoke up then, his young voice full of bitter knowledge. "Mama's brother said we could come live with him in Kansas, but when we got there," the boy's jaw clenched tight, "said he changed his mind, said 3 extra mouths was too many to feed." Sam felt something dark and terrible rise in his chest, the same protective fury he'd felt when bullies picked on smaller kids back when he was Tommy's age. These babies had been abandoned, cast off like they didn't matter, and it made Sam's hands clench into fists. "Well," Sam heard himself saying, his voice steadier than it had been in years, "reckon y'all are welcome to stay here till the storm passes and you figure out where you're headed next." The gratitude on Grace's face was almost too much to bear, but it was little Jake who near about broke Sam completely. The boy looked up at him with eyes the same shade as William's and whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Sam. You're real nice." Sam had to turn away quick before they saw the tears threatening to spill over. Nice. When was the last time anybody had called Sam Carter nice? When was the last time he'd done anything deserving of the word? Outside, the storm raged on, but inside Sam's cabin, something had shifted. The firelight danced across the walls, chasing away shadows that had lived there too long, and for the first time in 15 years, the silence didn't feel like a punishment. But Sam Carter was a man acquainted with loss, and he couldn't shake the feeling that letting these people into his heart might just be setting himself up for another kind of destruction entirely. The storm passed sometime during the night, leaving Pine Ridge Forest draped in an eerie silence that felt heavier than all that thunder and lightning combined. Sam had barely slept a wink, lying on the hard floor by the fireplace while Grace and the children took his bed. Every time little Jake whimpered in his sleep or Lucy cried out from some nightmare, Sam's chest clenched tight as a fist around his heart. Dawn came pale and uncertain through the cabin windows, and Sam rose from his makeshift bed, feeling like he'd been trampled by a team of mules. His back screamed in protest, but that physical pain was nothing compared to the raw ache of having people in his space again, breathing life into air that had been dead for 15 years. Grace was already awake, sitting by the dying fire with little Jake in her lap, stroking his hair while he dozed fitfully. She looked up when Sam stirred, her eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and worry that seemed to run soul-deep. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the morning breeze. "I know this ain't easy for you, having strangers in your home." Sam grunted and turned away, unable to meet those grateful eyes. He shuffled to the kitchen and started making coffee with hands that still trembled from last night's emotional upheaval. "Storm's past," he said roughly. "Reckon y'all can move on soon as the roads dry up some." The words came out harsher than he intended, and he saw Grace flinch like he'd slapped her. But Lord help him, Sam couldn't let these people settle into his heart. He'd learned that lesson the hardest way possible. Loving someone just gave the world more ways to break you. Tommy appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed in clothes too small for his growing frame. "Mr. Sam," the boy said carefully, "I could help you with chores today. Mama taught me to work real good." Sam stared at the child, seeing too much of his younger self in those serious eyes. "Don't need help," he said gruffly, but even as the words left his mouth, he was remembering how his own daddy had pushed him away, how being rejected had felt like a knife to the gut. "Please," Tommy said quietly, and there was something desperate in his voice that made Sam's chest tighten. "I know we ain't paying you nothing for letting us stay, but I can work. I'm strong for my age." Before Sam could answer, the sound of horses approaching cut through the morning air like a blade. Sam's whole body went rigid, every instinct screaming, danger. In 15 years, nobody had come to his cabin except Pastor Williams, and those visits had stopped long ago. Grace must have heard it too, because she clutched little Jake tighter and looked toward the door with the kind of fear that comes from being hunted. "No," she breathed, her face going white as fresh snow. "No, he can't have found us already." "Who?" Sam demanded, but his hands were already moving toward the shotgun above the fireplace. Something about Grace's terror had awakened every protective instinct he'd thought was dead and buried. The horses stopped outside, and Sam heard boots hitting the ground, heard low voices discussing something in tones that raised the hair on his neck. Grace was shaking now, pulling Lucy and Jake close while Tommy stepped in front of them like a shield. 3 sharp knocks echoed through the cabin, not desperate like last night, but demanding, commanding. The knock of a man who expected doors to open for him. "Grace," a voice called out, smooth as honey but with steel underneath. "Grace, honey, I know you're in there. Come on out now and let's discuss this like civilized folks." Sam had never heard that voice before, but he hated it instantly. There was something in the tone, ownership, entitlement, that made his blood run hot and his fists clench tight. "Matthew," Grace whispered, and the name came out like a curse word. "Oh Lord, he found us." "Who's Matthew?" Sam growled, but he could already guess. The kind of man who made a woman and children run through a storm rather than face him. My late husband's brother," Grace said, her voice breaking. "He's been trying to. He says the children should be with family, but he don't want them for love. He wants—" She couldn't finish, but Sam could see the terror in her eyes. The knocking came again, harder this time. "Grace, don't make this difficult. You know you can't care for those children on your own. They need a man's guidance, and I'm their rightful guardian now." Sam felt something dark and primitive rise in his chest, the same rage he'd felt as a boy, when bigger kids picked on the weak, the same fury that had made him fight tooth and nail for everything he'd ever protected. These people had knocked on his door seeking shelter, and by God they'd have it. "Stay back," Sam told Grace, his voice deadly calm. He grabbed his shotgun and moved toward the door, feeling more alive than he had in 15 years. "Tommy, you keep your mama and the little ones behind me." Sam threw open the door and stepped onto his porch, the shotgun cradled in his arms, in a way that wasn't quite threatening but wasn't exactly peaceful either. 3 men sat on horseback in his yard, all dressed too fine for these mountains, all wearing the kind of smirks that said they were used to getting their way. The one in front, Matthew, was a handsome man in his 40s with dark hair slicked back and eyes like chips of ice. He looked at Sam with the kind of dismissive glance rich men give to trash they're fixing to step over. "Well now," Matthew said, his voice dripping with false charm, "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Matthew Miller, and I'm here for my family." "Ain't your family," Sam said quietly, but his voice carried like thunder across the clearing. "They're under my roof now." Matthew's smile widened, but it never reached his eyes. "Now see here, friend, I don't know what sob story my sister-in-law told you, but those children belong with bloodkin. I've got legal papers that say so. I got something that says different, Sam replied, shifting the shotgun just enough to catch the morning light on the barrel. It's called the business end of this here gun, and it don't much care about your papers. For the first time, Matthew's composure cracked just a little, but he recovered quick, that oily smile sliding back into place. You're making a mistake, friend. I'm a respected businessman in Cedar Valley. Those children need proper guidance, not whatever this is. Sam stepped closer to the edge of his porch, and something in his movement made all three horses shy back a step. So I'll tell you what they need, Sam said, his voice carrying 15 years of rage and pain. They need to be left alone by men who see them as property instead of people. You don't understand the situation, Matthew said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Grace is unfit to care for those children. She's got no money, no prospects, no family willing to help. I'm offering them a good home. Then why are they running from you? Sam asked simply. The question hung in the air like smoke from a forest fire. Matthew's jaw tightened, and Sam saw the real man underneath the polished surface, something cold and calculating and mean. This isn't over, Matthew said finally, wheeling his horse around. I'll be back, and next time I'll have the sheriff with me. You can't hide them forever. As the three men rode away, Sam felt Grace come up behind him, felt her hand rest lightly on his shoulder. Thank you, she whispered. And there was something in her voice that made Sam's chest feel tight and strange. I don't know why you're helping us, but thank you. Sam couldn't answer. He couldn't tell her that for the first time in 15 years, he'd felt like a man instead of a ghost. Couldn't explain that protecting her and those children had awakened something in him that he'd thought was buried forever. All he knew was that Matthew Miller had just made the biggest mistake of his life by threatening people under Sam Carter's protection. After Matthew Miller rode away with his threats hanging in the air like smoke from a forest fire, Sam Carter found himself standing on his porch, feeling like a man who'd just declared war against the whole world. His hands still trembled from the confrontation, but not from fear, from something far more dangerous. For the first time in 15 years, Sam had something worth protecting, and Lord help him, that knowledge scared him more than any threat Matthew could make. Grace stood behind him in the doorway, her face pale as morning mist, holding little. Jake so tight the boy was starting to squirm. He won't give up, she whispered, her voice breaking like dry kindling. Matthew don't take no for an answer, never has. He'll be back with the law, with papers, with whatever it takes to get what he wants. What exactly does he want? Sam asked, though his gut already knew the answer would make his blood boil. Grace's face crumpled and she sank into the rocking chair that had sat empty for 15 years, Mary's chair. Seeing another woman there should have felt like betrayal, but instead it felt like the chair had finally found its purpose again. The children's daddy, my husband Robert. He had a small farm, nothing much, but it's good land. Matthew's been trying to buy it for years, but Robert wouldn't sell. Now that Robert's gone here, he wants the land, Sam finished, his voice hard as winter iron. And the only way he can get it legal is if he has custody of Robert's children. Tommy stepped up beside Sam, his young face set in lines too mature for a 10-year-old. That's why we had to run, Mr. Sam. He kept saying how we'd be better off with him, how Mama couldn't provide for us proper. But I heard him talking to his business partner about developing the land, turning it into some kind of resort for rich folks from the city. The rage that filled Sam's chest was so hot and pure, it nearly knocked him sideways. These weren't just children to Matthew Miller. They were obstacles to be removed, properties to be acquired. The man was willing to destroy a family for money, and that kind of evil made Sam's trigger finger itch something fierce. Mr. Sam, Lucy's small voice cut through his dark thoughts. The little girl was standing by the fireplace, holding the wooden toy truck Sam had carved for baby William all those years ago. Is this yours? It's real pretty. Sam's breath caught in his throat like a fishhook. Grace gasped softly, realizing what her daughter was holding. But before she could scold the child, Sam knelt down in front of Lucy, his knees creaking like old floorboards. That belonged to my boy, Sam said quietly, his voice rough as tree bark. My son William. He went to be with Jesus when he was just a baby. Lucy's eyes went wide and serious. Was he sick? No, honey, Sam managed, the words feeling like swallowing broken glass. He and his mama, they had an accident. Been gone 15 years now. To Sam's amazement, Lucy didn't ask more questions or offer empty comfort like adults always did. Instead, she carefully placed the truck back on the mantel, and walked over to wrap her small arms around Sam's neck. "I'm sorry your little boy can't play with his truck no more," she whispered against his ear. Maybe he wouldn't mind if Jake played with it sometimes. Jake's real careful with toys." Sam's composure shattered like ice hit with a sledgehammer. He buried his face against Lucy's shoulder and let 15 years of tears fall while this little girl patted his back like she was comforting her own child. Grace watched with tears streaming down her cheeks, and Tommy stood guard by the window, trying to be strong while his own eyes filled up. When Sam finally pulled himself together, he looked around at these people who'd stumbled into his life and felt something he'd thought was dead forever: the fierce, protective love of a man for his family. Not blood family maybe, but family all the same. "Grace," he said, his voice steadier than it had been in years, "I need to know something, and I need the truth. Do you want to stay here? Not just till you figure something else out, but really stay? Because if you do..." Grace's breath hitched. "Sam, you don't know what you're saying. We got nothing to offer you but trouble. Matthew won't stop, and when folks in town find out the ghost of Pine Ridge is harboring a woman and children, let them talk," Sam said firmly. "I've been dead to this world for 15 years. Maybe it's time I started living again." Little Jake had been listening to the grown-up talk with the serious expression children get when they know important things are being decided. Now he slipped away from his mama and walked over to Sam, looking up with those brown eyes that were so much like William's. "Mr. Sam," Jake said in his sweet high voice, "if we stay here, can I call you Papa Sam? My real papa's in heaven with your little boy, but I ain't got a papa down here no more." Sam's heart stopped beating for a full 3 seconds. The word papa hit him like lightning, bringing back memories of William babbling "dada" and reaching tiny hands toward his face. But instead of the crushing pain he expected, Sam felt something warm and healing spread through his chest. "If your mama says it's all right," Sam whispered, his throat tight with emotion, "then I reckon I'd be honored to be your Papa Sam." Grace was crying openly now, but they were tears of relief mixed with terror. "Sam, are you sure? Once Matthew finds out we're staying, once he knows you're standing with us, there's no going back. He'll make our lives miserable, and yours too." Sam stood up slowly, feeling like a man who'd been reborn. "Grace, for 15 years I've been walking around like a ghost waiting to die. These children, y'all have given me something I thought I'd lost forever. The chance to be a man again, a protector, maybe even..." He paused, looking at her with eyes that held hope for the first time in years. "Maybe even a husband and father. Again, if you'll have me." The silence that followed was so complete, you could hear a pin drop in the next county. Grace stared at him with her mouth open. The children looked back and forth between the adults, and Sam felt his heart hammering like a woodpecker against his ribs. "You asking what I think you're asking," Grace whispered. "I'm asking if you'd consider making this arrangement permanent," Sam said carefully. "Marriage, family, the whole thing. I know it's sudden, I know you barely know me, but Grace, I ain't felt this alive in 15 years. You and these children, y'all brought light back into my darkness." Before Grace could answer, the sound of multiple horses approaching cut through the emotional moment like a blade. Sam grabbed his shotgun and moved to the window, his blood turning cold at what he saw. Matthew Miller was back, and this time he'd brought the sheriff, 2 deputies, and what looked like half the town council with him. "Well," Sam said grimly, checking his weapon, "looks like we're about to find out just how permanent this arrangement's gonna be." The war for his newfound family was about to begin, and Sam Carter had never been more ready for a fight in his life. The sight of Sheriff Ive Davis riding up with Matthew Miller and half the town council made Sam's blood run cold as mountain snow. But what really twisted the knife in his gut was seeing Pastor Williams among them, the man who'd once tried to bring comfort to Sam's shattered soul, now riding alongside the very people trying to tear apart the first family Sam had loved in 15 years. "Sam Carter," Sheriff Davis called out, his voice carrying the authority of the badge pinned to his chest. "I need you to come out here and talk reasonable. We got us a situation that needs sorting." Sam stepped onto his porch, shotgun held loose but ready, feeling Grace and the children pressed close behind him like a wall of hope at his back. Lord help him, but the terror in their breathing cut deeper than any blade ever could. "Sheriff," Sam said evenly, though his heart was hammering like a blacksmith's anvil, "what brings you to my property with such distinguished company?" Matthew Miller urged his horse forward, that same oily smile plastered across his face like fresh paint over rotted wood. "Now, Sam, let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be. I've got legal custody papers for those children, signed by Judge Thornton himself. They belong with their rightful family." "Funny thing about that," Sam replied, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. "Far as I can tell, them children chose where they want to belong, and it ain't with you." Pastor Williams spoke up then, his voice heavy with the kind of authority that comes from speaking for the Almighty. "Sam, I know you mean well, but these children need proper Christian guidance. A single woman can't provide the moral structure. They require, and well, son, you've been away from the Lord's path for a mighty long time." Those words hit Sam like a physical blow, mainly because there was truth in them that cut right to the bone. He had turned his back on God after Mary and William died, had spent 15 years nursing his anger like a favored child, but standing here with Grace's hand touching his shoulder and little Jake's fingers clutching his shirt, Sam felt something he hadn't felt in years, the presence of the divine working through love instead of loss. "Pastor," Sam said quietly, "maybe I have been wandering in the wilderness, but seems to me the good Lord just led me back to the path by bringing this family to my door. If that ain't providence, I don't know what is." Sheriff Davis shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Sam could see the man didn't much like this duty, but the law was the law, and Matthew Miller had money and influence that spoke louder than justice in these parts. "Sam, I need you to step aside and let Mr. Miller take custody. 5 those children. You ain't got no legal standing here, and interfering with a court order is a serious matter." Behind Sam, little Jake started crying. Not the loud wails of a tantrum, but the quiet, hopeless sobs of a child who'd learned that adults would always let him down. The sound nearly broke Sam's heart clean in two. "Please," Grace whispered, her voice thick with tears. "Please don't take them. They're all I got left of their daddy. They're my whole world." Matthew's mask of civility finally slipped, revealing the cold calculation underneath. "Grace, honey, you're being hysterical. These children need stability, education, proper guidance. What can you offer them? Poverty, uncertainty, a life hiding in the woods with a broken-down hermit?" That's when Tommy stepped forward, his young voice cutting through the tension like a knife through butter. "Mr. Miller, sir, with all due respect, we don't want to go with you. We want to stay here with Mama and Papa Sam." The use of that name, Papa Sam, sent a shock through the assembled men like lightning through a tree. Sam felt tears threatening to spill over, felt 15 years of careful emotional walls crumbling like sand castles in a storm. "You see," Matthew said with satisfaction, "the boy's already been corrupted, taught to disrespect proper authority. This is exactly why they need to be removed from this situation." Pastor Williams looked troubled now, studying Sam's face with the keen eyes of a man who'd spent decades reading souls. "Sam," he said gently, "these children, they mean something. To you, don't they?" Sam's throat worked like he was trying to swallow a stone. "Pastor, I ain't been much for praying these past years. Figured the good Lord and I were through talking after he took everything that mattered to me. But these people..." His voice broke and he had to stop to gather himself. "These people brought light back into my darkness. For the first time since Mary and William died, I got something worth living for again. This is touching, really," Matthew said with mock sympathy. "But the law is the law." "Sheriff, if you please." Sheriff Davis started to dismount, but Pastor Williams held up a hand. "Wait, Sheriff. Sam, tell me about the night they came to you. Tell me about how you found them." Sam's eyes grew distant as he remembered that storm, that desperate knocking, the sight of Grace and her children freezing on his doorstep. "It was during the worst storm we'd seen in years, Pastor. They came knocking like the good Lord himself had sent them to me. Grace here was about to collapse, and the children, Lord have mercy, they were near frozen to death. And you took them in," Pastor Williams said, understanding dawning in his voice. "A man who'd shut himself off from the world for 15 years. You opened your door and took in strangers in their hour of need. Weren't nothing Christian about it," Sam said roughly. "Was just human." Pastor Williams smiled then, the first genuine smile Sam had seen from him in years. "Son, that's the most Christian thing I've heard in these mountains in a long time. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares." Matthew's face darkened. "This is ridiculous, Pastor. Surely you're not going to let sentiment override proper legal procedure." But Pastor Williams was studying Grace now, seeing the way she held her children, the fierce protective love in her eyes. "Tell me, Mrs. Miller, do you love this man?" Grace's cheeks flushed red as autumn leaves, but she lifted her chin with dignity. Yes, Pastor, I do." He's shown more kindness to my children in 3 days than they've seen in months. He's a good man with a good heart, just hurt by loss like we all are. And you, Sam, Pastor Williams asked, do you love this woman and her children? Sam looked at Grace, at Tommy standing brave and protective, at Lucy clutching her mama's skirt, at little Jake with tears still wet on his cheeks. The answer rose from somewhere deep in his soul, somewhere he'd thought was dead forever. With everything I got left in me, Sam said, his voice strong and sure. I love them like they were my own blood. I'd die before I'd let anyone hurt them. Pastor Williams nodded slowly, then turned to Sheriff Davis. Sheriff, I believe we need to reconsider this situation. These children aren't being neglected or mistreated. They're being loved by people who want them. And that's not something you find every day. Pastor, with respect, Matthew snapped, you don't have legal authority here. No, Pastor Williams agreed, but I do have moral authority, and in the eyes of the Lord that counts for something. Sheriff, I suggest you talk to Judge Thornton about a hearing where all parties can present their case properly. Sheriff Davis looked relieved to have an excuse to delay. Reckon that sounds fair. Matthew, you'll get your hearing, but for now these children stay where they are. As the group rode away, Matthew's parting words hung in the air like a curse. This ain't over, Sam Carter, not by a long shot. But for the first time in 15 years, Sam Carter wasn't afraid of tomorrow. The 3 days between Pastor Williams' intervention and the custody hearing felt like the longest 3 days of Sam Carter's life, and Lord knows he'd lived through some mighty long days in his time. Every morning he woke expecting to see Matthew Miller riding up with more legal papers or hired guns. Every evening he went to bed wondering if this would be the last night he'd have Grace and the children under his roof. But it was also the sweetest 3 days he'd known since Mary and William died. Grace moved through his cabin like she'd always belonged there, cooking meals that filled the place with warmth and the kind of smells that made a house feel like a home. The children had settled in with the easy adaptability of youth. Tommy, helping with chores like he was born to it. Lucy singing little songs while she played with cornhusk dolls. And Jake following Sam around like a devoted shadow, chattering away about everything and nothing. On the morning of the hearing, Sam stood before the cracked mirror in his bedroom, trying to make himself look like something other than a wild mountain man who'd been hiding from civilization for 15 years. Grace had washed and mended his best shirt, the one Mary had sewn for him before they married, and somehow having Grace's hands work where Mary's once had felt like a blessing instead of a betrayal. You look real handsome, Papa Sam, Jake said. From the doorway, his small face serious as a preacher's on Sunday. The boy had taken to calling him Papa Sam so naturally it made Sam's chest tight with emotion every single time. Reckon I look like what I am, Sam replied, kneeling down to Jake's level. A man who's scared out of his wits but trying to do right by his family. Jake's little hand patted Sam's cheek with the tender concern of a child who'd learned too young that adults could hurt just as much as children. Don't be scared, Papa Sam. The good Lord's gonna help us. Mama said so when we prayed last night. Sam had to turn away before the boy saw the tears threatening to spill over. Grace had been teaching the children to pray for their situation, and even though Sam wasn't sure he and the Almighty were back on speaking terms yet, he'd found himself whispering his own desperate pleas into the darkness of night. The courthouse in Cedar Valley was packed tighter than a Sunday service when Sam and his makeshift family arrived. Word had spread through the mountains about the hermit of Pine Ridge and the family he was fighting to keep, and it seemed like half the county had turned out to see how the story would end. Sam felt every eye in that courtroom boring into him as he walked down the aisle with Grace on his arm and the children close beside them. He could hear the whispers, could feel the judgment rolling off some folks like heat off a cookstove, but he could also see faces filled with sympathy and understanding, people who knew what it meant to fight for family, to love something more than your own safety. Judge Thornton was a stern-faced man with white whiskers and the kind of eyes that had seen too much human foolishness to be surprised by anything. He called the court to order with a bang of his gavel that echoed through the room like thunder. "We're here today," the judge announced, "to determine the custody of 3 minor children, Thomas, Lucy, and Jacob Miller. Mr. Matthew Miller claims rightful guardianship as the children's uncle, while they currently reside with Mr. Samuel Carter and their mother, Mrs. Grace Miller." Matthew stood up first, looking every inch the respectable businessman in his fine suit and polished shoes. He spoke for what felt like an hour about his financial stability, his proper Christian home, his ability to provide education and opportunities for the children. Everything he said was reasonable, logical, practical, and completely missing the point. "So, Your Honor," Matthew concluded. These children deserve better than poverty and uncertainty. They deserve a stable home with family who can provide for their future. When it came Sam's turn to speak, he stood on legs that felt like water, his hands shaking so bad he had to clasp them behind his back. He'd never been much for public speaking, and having all these eyes on him made his throat feel drier than August dust. "Your Honor," Sam began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I ain't gonna stand here and tell you I'm rich or educated or any of them things Mr. Miller talked about. Truth is, I'm just a broken-down man who spent 15 years hiding from life. After I lost everything that mattered to me, the courtroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop in the next county." Sam looked at Grace, at the children, and found the strength to continue. "But 3 nights ago, these people knocked on my door. In the worst storm I ever seen. They were cold and hungry and scared, and they needed help. And when I looked into them children's eye," Sam's voice broke, and he had to stop to gather himself. "When I saw little Jake shivering, and Lucy trying not to cry, and Tommy standing, brave trying to protect his family, something inside me came back to life." Sam turned to face Matthew directly, his voice growing stronger with every word. "You talk about what you can give them, Mr. Miller. Money, education, opportunities. But what about love? What about wanting them for who they are, not what they can get you? Because that's what this is really about, ain't it? You don't want them children. You want that land they inherit." A murmur ran through the courtroom like wind through wheat. Matthew's face flushed red, but he kept his composure. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Carter," Judge Thornton said sternly. "It's the truth," Tommy spoke up suddenly, his young voice carrying clearly through the room. "Your Honor, sir, my mama never wanted to speak ill of family, but Mr. Miller's been trying to buy our land since before Daddy died. When Daddy wouldn't sell, Mr. Miller said he'd find another way to get it." "Tommy, that's enough," Matthew snapped, but the damage was done. Judge Thornton's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Miller, is there truth to this accusation?" Matthew's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but Matthew was too angry to listen to caution. "Your Honor, that land has been in our family for generations. It deserves to be developed, turned into something profitable, instead of being wasted on subsistence farming by a woman who can't even feed her own children properly." The courtroom erupted in angry voices. Judge Thornton banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order, but Sam could see the tide had turned. Matthew had revealed his true motivations, and they were as ugly as Sam had suspected. "Mr. Miller," Judge Thornton said when quiet returned, "your concern for the land rather than the children is noted. Mrs. Miller, what are your wishes regarding custody?" Grace stood up, her voice steady despite her tears. "Your Honor, I want my children to stay, with me and the man I intend to marry. Sam Carter has shown more love and kindness to my family in 3 days than we've seen in months. He's a good man with a good heart, and he loves these children like they were his own. And you, Mr. Carter," the judge said, "are you prepared to take on the responsibility of raising these children as your own?" Sam looked at Tommy's hopeful face, at Lucy's trust-filled eyes, at little Jake reaching for his hand. "Your Honor, I'd be honored to call them my children. They've already called me Papa, and that's worth more to me than all the money in the world." Judge Thornton was quiet for a long moment, studying the faces before him. Finally, he spoke. "It's clear to this court that Mr. Matthew Miller's primary interest lies in acquiring property, rather than caring for children. It's equally clear that these children have found love and stability with Mr. Carter and their mother. Therefore, I award full custody to Mrs. Grace Miller, with the recommendation that she and Mr. Carter formalize their union and their guardianship as soon as possible." The courtroom exploded in cheers and applause. Sam felt his knees buckle with relief as Grace threw her arms around him, and the children pressed close, all of them crying and laughing at the same time. But even in his moment of triumph, Sam caught sight of Matthew Miller's face as the man stormed from the courtroom, and the hatred there promised this victory might come at a price none of them were prepared to pay. The victory at the courthouse should have felt like the end of their troubles, but Sam Carter had lived long enough to know that some men don't take defeat lying down, especially men like Matthew Miller, who were used to getting their way through money and intimidation. As they rode home from Cedar Valley in the wagon Sam had borrowed from a neighbor, the weight of Matthew's parting glare sat heavy on his shoulders, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. But Lord have mercy, it was hard to stay worried when little Jake was curled up in his lap, chattering away about how Papa Sam was the bravest man in the whole world, and how he was going to tell everyone at church on Sunday about his new daddy. Grace sat beside him on the wagon seat, her hand resting gently on his arm, and for the first time in 15 years, Sam felt like he belonged somewhere, like he had a purpose beyond just surviving one more day. "Sam," Grace said quietly, as the cabin came into view through the trees, "Judge Thornton said we should get married soon to make everything legal and proper. I know it ain't the most romantic proposal, but..." She paused, her cheeks flushing pink as spring apple blossoms. "I meant what I said in that courtroom. I do love you, and not just because you saved us. You're a good man, Sam Carter, better than you know." Sam's throat tightened up like a hangman's noose. "Grace, honey, I ain't been much of anything for 15 years. I don't know how to be a husband again, don't know how to be a daddy to children who ain't my blood. What if I fail them? What if I fail you?" Tommy spoke up from the back of the wagon, his voice carrying the wisdom that comes from growing up too fast. "Papa Sam, blood don't make family. Love does, and you already love us." "Hi, Sam, I can see it in your eyes when you look at us." "That's right," Lucy chimed in, her sweet voice bright as morning sunshine. "You make Mama smile again, and you teach us things, and you don't yell when Jake spills his milk like..." She stopped, her face clouding over. "Like what, baby girl?" Sam asked gently. "Like Mr. Matthew used to when he came to visit," Lucy whispered. "He always made Mama cry after he left." The rage that filled Sam's chest at those words was so pure and hot, it nearly knocked him sideways. The thought of that snake making Grace cry, making these innocent children walk on eggshells in their own home, made Sam's hands clench tight around the wagon reins. "Well," Sam said firmly, "ain't nobody gonna make your mama cry anymore, not while I got breath in my body." When they reached the cabin, Sam helped Grace down from the wagon, and for a moment they stood close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she'd used to wash her hair. The urge to kiss her was so strong it made his knees weak, but with the children watching and everything so new and fragile between them, Sam just touched her face gently with one calloused finger. "Grace Miller," he said softly, "would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I know I ain't much to look at, and I don't have much to offer except this old cabin and a heart that's been broken but is healing thanks to you and these young'uns. But I promise you this, I'll love you and protect you and these children till the day I die." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears that caught the afternoon sunlight like diamonds. "Yes, Sam Carter. Yes, I'll marry you." The children whooped and hollered like it was Christmas morning, and Jake threw his little arms around Sam's legs so tight, Sam thought the boy might cut off his circulation. But as they celebrated on the cabin porch, Sam noticed movement in the tree line, a flash of something that didn't belong, a shadow where no shadow should be. His joy turned to ice water in his veins. Someone was watching them. That night, after the children were asleep and Grace was mending clothes by the firelight, Sam sat cleaning his shotgun with the methodical care of a man preparing for war. The feeling of being watched had never left him, and every sound from the forest made his nerves jump like grasshoppers in a hot skillet. "You're scared," Grace said quietly, not looking up from her sewing. "I can see it in the way you keep checking the windows." "Matthew ain't the type to give up easy," Sam admitted. "Men like him, when they lose face in public like he did today, well, they tend to want revenge more than they want justice." Grace set down her needle and thread, her face pale in the flickering firelight. "You think he'll try to take the children by force? I think a man who sees children as property instead of people is capable of just about anything," Sam said grimly. "But Grace, I want you to know, whatever comes, I ain't backing down. These children are mine now, in my heart if not by blood, and I'll die before I let anyone hurt them." The next morning dawned grey and cold, with the kind of mist that clung to the mountains like sorrow. Sam was splitting wood outside when he heard the horses coming. Not the official procession of the day before, but something quieter, more dangerous. He called softly for Grace to take the children inside, then positioned himself where he could see the trail leading to his cabin. What he saw made his blood run cold. Matthew Miller was riding up with 3 men Sam didn't recognize, hard-looking characters, with the kind of eyes that had seen too much of the dark side of human nature. These weren't lawmen or town officials. These were the kind of men you hired when legal means had failed and you needed something done quiet and permanent. "Carter," Matthew called out, staying well out of shotgun range. "I want to talk." "We already talked," Sam replied, his weapon ready but not quite aimed. "Judge said his piece yesterday." "Judges can be overruled," Matthew said with that same oily smile, though now it looked more like a wolf baring its teeth. "Accidents happen to people living this far out in the wilderness. Fires start from faulty chimneys. Wild animals attack families. Terrible tragedies, really, but these mountains can be dangerous for folks who don't belong here. The threat was clear as mountain water, and Sam felt something cold and deadly settle into his bones. You threatening my family, Matthew? I'm offering you one last chance to be reasonable, Matthew replied. Sign over custody of those children, take your woman and disappear. Go somewhere far away where nobody knows your name. Do that, and you can live out your days in peace. And if I don't, Sam asked, though he already knew the answer. Matthew's smile widened. Well, like I said, these mountains can be mighty dangerous, especially for folks who bite off more than they can chew. Sam stepped forward, his shotgun coming up to a more aggressive angle. You listen to me real good, Matthew Miller. You come on my land again. You threaten my family again, and it won't be the mountains you need to worry about. It'll be me. We'll see about that, Matthew said, wheeling his horse around. You've got till tomorrow night to think it over. After that, he shrugged, leaving the threat hanging in the air like smoke from a forest fire. As the men rode away, Sam felt Grace come up behind him, felt her hand slip into his. What are we gonna do? She whispered. Sam looked at his cabin, at the home he'd built with his own hands, at the place where he'd buried his heart 15 years ago, and where he'd found it again 3 days past. Then he looked at the woman beside him and thought about the children sleeping safe in his bed. We're gonna fight, Sam said quietly, because some things are worth fighting for, and family, chosen family, is at the top of that list. But as the sun set behind the mountains that night, Sam Carter couldn't shake the feeling that the real test of his newfound purpose was about to begin. And this time, love might not be enough to win the day. That night, after Matthew's ultimatum, Sam Carter didn't sleep a wink. He sat by the window with his shotgun across his knees, watching the tree line for any sign of movement, while his mind churned like a mill wheel in a fast-flowing creek. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound from the forest made his heart jump like a rabbit sensing a fox nearby. Grace had put the children to bed early, whispering prayers with them that Sam could hear through the thin cabin walls. Little Jake's voice rose above the others, asking the good Lord to keep Papa Sam safe and to help the bad men go away. That innocent prayer hit Sam harder than any punch he'd ever taken, reminding him that he wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for 3 small souls who'd already lost one daddy and couldn't bear to lose another. Around midnight, Grace came to sit beside him, bringing 2 cups of coffee that steamed in the cold air. She'd changed into her nightgown and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, looking so much like Mary used to in those quiet moments before dawn that Sam's chest ached with the weight of memory and hope tangled together like briars. You can't stay awake forever, she said softly, settling beside him on the wooden bench he'd built under the window. You'll be no good to any of us if you're dead on your feet when trouble comes. Sam took the coffee gratefully, wrapping his calloused hands around the warm cup like it was an anchor in a storm. Can't sleep knowing they're out there somewhere, planning God knows what. Grace, honey, I need you to understand something. He turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the moonlight filtering through the window. If things go bad tomorrow, if Matthew and his hired guns come for the children, I need you to take them and run. Don't look back, don't wait for me, just get them somewhere safe. Grace's face went pale as fresh snow, and she shook her head with the fierce determination of a mother protecting her young. I ain't leaving you, Sam Carter. We're family now, for better or worse, and families stick together. Grace, please. Sam's voice cracked with desperation. I already lost one family because I couldn't protect them. I won't be able to live with myself if something happens to you or the children because of me. The words hung between them like a confession that had been bottled up too long. Grace set down her coffee and took Sam's face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. Sam, listen to me real good. What happened to Mary and baby William wasn't your fault. You can't blame yourself for an accident, for something that was beyond your control. But this, she gestured toward the dark forest beyond the window. This is different. This time we're fighting together as a family, and we're gonna win because we have something Matthew Miller don't understand. We have love worth fighting for. Just as Grace finished speaking, a sound from outside made them both freeze. It was subtle, the snap of a twig, the soft whinny of a horse being quieted. But to Sam's trained ears, it might as well have been a church bell ringing out danger. They're here, Sam whispered, reaching for his shotgun. Grace's face went white, but she didn't panic. Instead, she moved with the quiet efficiency of a woman who'd learned to be strong in the face of fear. I'll wake the children and get them to the root cellar like we planned. Grace, Sam caught her arm as she started to rise. "I love you. Whatever happens, I need you to know that. These past few days with you and the children, they've been the best days of my life since Mary and William died." Tears filled Grace's eyes, but her voice was steady as mountain stone. "I love you too, Sam Carter. Now go protect our family." Sam moved through the cabin like a shadow, checking the barricades. He'd built across the windows, making sure his spare ammunition was within easy reach. He could hear Grace whispering urgently to the children, explaining that they needed to play a quiet game in the hidden cellar under the kitchen floor, a space Sam had dug out years ago to store root vegetables, but which now served as a refuge for the most precious things in his world. Through the window, Sam could see shapes moving in the darkness, at least 4 men, maybe more, spreading out to surround the cabin. Matthew was taking no chances this time, bringing enough firepower to handle any resistance Sam might offer. "Carter!" Matthew's voice cut through the night air like a blade. "This is your last chance. Send out the woman and children and we'll let you live." Sam positioned himself at the front window, his shotgun trained on the general direction of Matthew's voice. "Only thing coming out of this cabin is buckshot if you don't get off my property." "Have it your way?" Matthew called back, and Sam could hear the cruel satisfaction in his voice. "Boys, light it up." What followed was the longest night of Sam Carter's life. Matthew's men tried everything, shooting out the windows, attempting to set fire to the cabin's walls, even trying to smoke them out by blocking the chimney. But Sam had built his home to last, and he defended it with the desperate fury of a man protecting everything he held dear. When dawn finally broke gray and cold over Pine Ridge, Sam found himself still alive, but running low on ammunition. His hands were black with gunpowder, his ears rang from the gunfire, and exhaustion weighed on him like a load of wet timber. Through the shattered remains of his front window, he could see Matthew and 2 of his men still crouched behind trees, waiting for their chance. That's when Sam heard the sound that changed everything. The thunder of horses approaching fast, accompanied by voices shouting orders. For a moment his heart sank, thinking Matthew had brought reinforcements, but then he recognized Pastor William's voice calling out commands, followed by Sheriff Davis demanding that everyone throw down their weapons. "This is the law, Sheriff," Davis shouted. "Anyone who doesn't surrender immediately will be arrested for attempted murder and arson." Sam watched in amazement as men from the town emerged from the forest. Members of Pastor William's congregation, stormed neighbors who'd heard the gunfire and come to help, even Judge Thornton himself riding with a deputized posse. The sight of half the county standing against him finally broke Matthew Miller's resolve. "This ain't over," Matthew screamed as the sheriff's men bound his hands. "You hear me, Carter? This ain't over." But Sam wasn't listening anymore. Grace had emerged from the cellar with the children, and they were running toward him across the cabin floor, crying and laughing and holding onto him like he was the most precious thing in the world. Little Jake wrapped his arms around Sam's neck and whispered, "I knew you'd keep us safe, Papa Sam. I just knew it." As the sun climbed higher in the sky and the townfolk helped clean up the damage from the night's battle, Pastor Williams approached Sam with a solemn expression. "Sam," the pastor said, "I owe you an apology. I should have seen what kind of man Matthew Miller really was long before this. But I want you to know what you did here, protecting your family against those odds. That's the kind of courage that comes from the Lord himself." Sam looked around at the bullet holes in his cabin walls, at the scorched marks where Matthew's men had tried to set fires, at the faces of his neighbors who'd risked their own lives to stand with him. Then he looked at Grace holding Lucy and Tommy, at little Jake still clinging to his leg like he'd never let go. "Pastor," Sam said quietly, "for 15 years I thought God had forgotten about me. Turns out, he was just waiting for the right time to remind me what I was supposed to be fighting for." 3 weeks later, Sam Carter and Grace Miller stood before Pastor Williams in the little white church in Cedar Valley, promising to love and honor each other till death did them part. Tommy and Lucy served as witnesses, and little Jake insisted on standing right beside Sam, holding the ring with the serious concentration of a child given an important job. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, and Sam kissed his bride for the first time, the whole congregation erupted in cheers and applause. But for Sam, the rest of the world faded away until there was nothing but Grace's smile and the knowledge that he'd finally found his way home. Later that evening, as they sat on the cabin porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, Grace, resting her head on Sam's shoulder while the children played in the yard, Sam felt a peace he'd never thought possible. "You know what the best part is?" Grace murmured against his shoulder. "What's that, Mrs. Carter?" Sam asked, still marveling. At the sound of her new name. "We're not just surviving anymore, Sam, we're living. Really, truly living." And for the first time in 15 years, Sam Carter knew she was absolutely right. 10 years had passed since that storm brought Grace Miller and her 3 young'uns to Sam Carter's doorstep, and Lord have mercy, what a decade it had been. The cabin that once housed nothing but grief and dust had grown into something mighty fine, a real home with additions built by loving hands and filled with the sounds of a family that chose each other and never looked back. Sam stood on his expanded front porch on this particular October morning, watching the sun paint the sky orange over Pine Ridge Forest. His weathered hands, still strong at 55, gripped a cup of coffee that Grace had made just the way he liked it. The man looking out over these mountains was nothing like the broken ghost who'd wandered these woods for 15 years. Sam Carter had purpose in his step, laugh lines around his eyes, and a heart that beat strong with love instead of just pumping blood to keep a hollow man breathing. "Papa Sam," called out 10-year-old Sarah, their youngest, as she ran through the yard chasing fireflies in the morning mist. That little girl was the spit-in image of Grace, but with Sam's stubborn chin and his way of seeing straight to the heart of things. Behind her came Lucy, now 18 and beautiful as a spring morning, helping her little sister catch those dancing lights before they disappeared with the sunrise. Tommy emerged from the workshop, where he'd been mending tools alongside his daddy since before dawn. At 20 years old, the boy had grown into a man any father would be proud of, strong as an ox, gentle as summer rain, with hands that could coax music from wood and metal, just like Sam had taught him. "I reckon we'll finish that new fence for the Henderson place today, Papa," he said, wiping sawdust from his hands. "They're paying good money for our work." 15-year-old Jake burst through the kitchen door, his voice still cracking sometimes, but carrying the confidence of a boy who'd never doubted he was loved. "Mama Grace says breakfast is ready, and she ain't gonna call twice." That boy had grown tall and lanky, but he still had that mischievous grin that reminded Sam of himself at that age, back before life taught him that happiness was something you had to fight for. As they gathered around the table, Grace had sat with her grandmother's china, the same china that had survived Matthew Miller's siege and somehow made it through 10 years of a growing family. Sam felt that familiar tightness in his chest. Not from pain this time, but from gratitude so pure it near about knocked him sideways every single morning. Grace caught his eye and smiled, that secret smile wives give their husbands when they know exactly what they're thinking. At 42, she was even more beautiful than the desperate woman who'd knocked on his door during that storm. Motherhood and love had filled out the hollow places in her cheeks, and security had put a light in her eyes that made Sam's heart skip like a stone across still water. "Sam," Grace said softly, her hand finding his across the table like it did every morning. "There's something I need to tell everyone." The family quieted, faces turning toward their mama with the attention that comes from years of trusting her. Words. "Old Pastor Williams came by yesterday while y'all were working. Says there's a new family in town, a widower with 2 little ones, been sleeping in their wagon behind the general store." Sam's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. He could see where this was heading, and part of him, the part that still remembered being the ghost of Pine Ridge, wanted to say they had enough troubles of their own, but the bigger part, the part that had been reborn through love and sacrifice, knew what Grace was really asking. "Mama," Lucy said gently, "you want to help them, don't you?" Grace nodded, her eyes bright with the kind of compassion that had made Sam fall in love with her in the first place. "Pastor says the man lost his wife to fever 3 months back, been traveling ever since trying to find work and a place to settle. Their children, Lord Sam, the oldest is barely 8 and the baby can't be more than 3. Tommy leaned forward, his young face serious. "What's their names, Mama?" The father's called Daniel Morrison. The little girl is Emma, and the boy, as Peter. Pastor Williams says Daniel's a good man, just lost and hurting like we all were once. Sam set down his coffee and looked around the table at his family, every face reflecting the same thought, the same memory of what it felt like, to have nowhere to go and no one to turn to. These children who'd once been refugees themselves, who'd learned that family wasn't about blood but about love, were already nodding agreement before the question was even asked. "Where are they gonna stay?" Jake asked practically. "General store. Ain't got room for a family." "Well," Sam said slowly, feeling the familiar stirring in his chest that came when the good Lord was nudging him towards something important, "I reckon we could make room." Been thinking about building another cabin anyway. Give Tommy somewhere to live when he finds himself a wife. Tommy blushed red as autumn leaves, but his grin was wide as the Tennessee River. Papa Sam, you sure? I mean, taking in strangers. Son, Sam interrupted gently. Weren't we all strangers once? Your mama and you young'uns knocked on my door during a storm, and I near about didn't let you in. Scared me to death, the thought of caring about people again. He paused, looking at each beloved face around the table. But sometimes the Lord sends us exactly what we need, even when we think we don't need anything at all. Sarah, who'd been listening with the serious concentration children bring to grown-up conversations, spoke up with the wisdom that sometimes comes from innocent hearts. Papa Sam, when I was real little and had nightmares, you used to tell me that love grows bigger when you share it, not smaller. Maybe this family needs some of our love to grow on. Sam's throat tightened up like it always did when his children, and they were his children, every one of them, showed him glimpses of the people they were becoming. That's right, baby girl. Love ain't like money that runs out when you spend it. Love gets bigger every time you give it away. Grace squeezed his hand, and he could see tears of pride and affection shining in her eyes. So we're all agreed. We invite the Morrison family to stay with us until they can get on their feet. The vote was unanimous, though Sam wouldn't have expected anything different from this family. They'd all learned the lesson that taking in strangers in need wasn't just Christian charity, it was how the Lord worked his miracles, one desperate knock on the door at a time. Later that morning, Sam and Tommy hitched up the wagon and drove into Cedar Valley, where they found Daniel Morrison sitting on a bench outside the general store with his 2 children pressed close to his sides. The man looked like Sam had felt 10 years ago, lost, broken, carrying grief so heavy it bent his shoulders and dimmed his eyes. "Mr. Morrison?" Sam said gently as he approached. "I'm Sam Carter, and this is my son Tommy," Pastor Williams told us about your situation. Daniel looked up with the wariness of a man who'd heard too many promises that turned to dust. "I appreciate any help, Mr. Carter, but I don't take charity. I work for what I get." Sam smiled, remembering another proud man who'd once said similar words. "Weren't offering charity, son, was offering family. You look like a man who knows his way around tools, and I got more work than I can handle building furniture and fixing things for folks around here. You and your young'uns want to come stay with us while you get back on your feet?" Little Emma Morrison peeked out from behind her daddy's leg, her big eyes taking in Sam's gentle face and Tommy's friendly smile. She reminded Sam so much of Lucy at that age, scared but hopeful, ready to trust if someone would just give her reason to. "Daddy," she whispered, "are they nice people?" Daniel Morrison's composure cracked just a little, and Sam could see the desperate hope he was trying to hide. "Mr. Carter, we don't have much to offer in return." "Son," Sam said, kneeling down, so he was at eye level with little Emma and baby Peter. "Sometimes the Lord sends us exactly what we need, disguised as someone who needs our help. My family learned that the hard way, and we ain't ever forgotten it." That afternoon, the Morrison family settled into the Carter household like they'd always belonged there. Grace fussed over little Peter, who was barely more than a baby and clearly missed having a mama's gentle touch. Sarah took Emma under her wing immediately, showing her the secret places around the property where wildflowers grew and teaching her the names of all the birds that nested in the old oak tree. As Sam watched his family expand once again to include these lost souls, he thought about the strange ways the good Lord worked his wonders. 10 years ago, he'd been a dead man walking, convinced that love was just another word for losing everything that mattered. Now he was surrounded by more family than one cabin could rightly hold, watching his own. Children teach newcomers the same lessons Grace and her young'uns had taught him. That evening, as they all gathered around the dinner table that Tommy had built with his own hands to accommodate their growing family, Sam offered the blessing that had become tradition in their home. "Lord," he said, his voice steady and sure, "we thank you for this food, for this family, and for the reminder that love multiplies when it's shared. Help us to always have room at our table and space in our hearts for whoever you send our way. And help the Morrison family to heal and find their place in this world, just like you helped us find ours. Amen." "Amen," came the chorus of voices around the table, some who'd been part of this family for 10 years, others who joined just hours ago, but all bound together by the same truth Sam had learned during that long-ago storm. Sometimes the greatest adventures don't come from seeking the unknown, but from opening your door when desperate strangers come knocking. Sometimes the strongest families aren't built on blood, but on the choice to love unconditionally. And sometimes a man who thinks he's lost everything discovers that the Lord was just clearing space in his heart for something bigger and more beautiful than he ever dared imagine. As the laughter and conversation flowed around his table that night, Sam Carter knew with absolute certainty that the ghost of Pine Ridge was truly dead and buried, replaced by a man who understood that the secret to living wasn't avoiding heartbreak, but having the courage to love again anyway. Now listen, here friends, Sam Carter's story ain't just about one man's journey from darkness to light. It's about the power every single one of us has to choose love over fear, to choose family over isolation, to choose hope over despair. Sam spent 15 years convinced he was too broken to love again, too damaged to be worth saving. But the truth is, we're all just one knock on the door away from the family we're meant to have. Are you living like the ghost of Pine Ridge, hiding from life because you've been hurt? Are you building walls instead of building relationships? Or are you ready to open your door when love comes knocking, even if it looks different than you expected? The beautiful truth about love is this: it don't run out when you share it. It multiplies. Every time you choose to love someone who needs it, every time you open your heart to family that ain't your blood, every time you decide to live instead of just survive, you're participating in the same miracle that transformed Sam Carter from a broken hermit into a beloved father and husband. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because these stories of redemption and love are what we're all about here. And if Sam's journey touched your heart, you need to watch the video that's appearing on your screen right now. From Maid to Mistress, when God unites souls through suffering and love in the Deep South. Another powerful story of how the Lord works through heartbreak to create something beautiful. Click on it now and keep watching these stories that remind us all that it's never too late to choose love over fear, family over isolation, and hope over despair.